Every morning at exactly 7:15, Mr. Gerald would sit at the same window-side table in a small diner called Mary's Diner, right at the Main Street corner of Millfield. The place wasn't big. Tile floors, red cushioned chairs worn with time, and walls lined with photos of American soldiers from different wars. The air always smelled of hot coffee, toasted bread, and something quietly comforting. Gerald, 73 years old, was a veteran who had served in Vietnam. He'd been in a wheelchair for several years, but still dressed the same each day. Crisp white shirt buttoned to the top, a baseball cap stitched with U.S. Army veteran, and well-shined black shoes. Mary, the owner, always brought him coffee without asking. "Good morning, Gerald. Still black, no sugar?" He'd nod slightly. No more words were needed. Between someone who had heard gunfire and someone who had waited for letters from her husband in the 70s, silence often spoke loudest. That morning was colder than usual. Gerald had just sipped his coffee when 3 teenagers pushed open the door, the bell above chiming sharply. They wore varsity jackets, spotless sneakers, and brought a burst of loud laughter with them. Gerald glanced over, but didn't mind. At his age, noise no longer disturbed him. He had lived through barracks, through nights of helicopter rotors and mortar fire. This was nothing. But then one of the boys noticed Gerald. He nudged his friend and smirked. "Hey, check out that statue over there. Looks like he hasn't moved in a decade." The 3 burst out laughing. Gerald didn't turn his head. He didn't react. He was used to people looking at him with pity, or worse, indifference. He was used to being forgotten. They sat at the table nearest to him, still joking loudly. After a while, one of them pulled out a scoop of mashed potatoes from a takeout box. Glancing around, he suddenly flung it toward Gerald. It hit his leg, sticking to the crease in his khaki pants. The boys howled with laughter. One mimicked an old man's voice and shouted, "Thanks for your service, Grandpa. Hope you still remember your name." The whole diner fell silent. Mary peeked from the kitchen, about to step forward, but Gerald's glance stopped her. He wasn't angry. He said nothing, just looked down at the mess spreading on his pants. Quietly, he pulled a napkin from a holder and wiped it off. In his mind, there was no rage, only emptiness. In 1969, he had once carried a wounded friend out of the jungles near Pleiku, praying for a medevac to arrive in time. That friend died on his shoulder. And now, decades later, Gerald, the survivor, the man who had sworn to protect his country, was being pelted with food by children as if he were a joke. Gerald didn't blame them. He blamed the times. A time that no longer taught its youth about sacrifice, about the blood and tears men like him had given. The doorbell rang again. The diner door opened. A tall man stepped in, wearing a police uniform. His face was stern, weathered, with graying hair under a black cap. He looked around and spotted the 3 boys, still laughing, until they saw him and froze. "Jason? Kyle? Ethan?" He called out each name. The boys turned, faces going pale. The diner was silent again. Gerald looked up. He met the man's eyes. The officer removed his hat and walked toward him. No questions, no explanations, just a glance at the mashed potato stain, and then a small, respectful bow. "I'm sorry, sir. My name is Officer Thomas Becker, and those 3 boys are my sons." The entire diner held its breath. One moment of silence as heavy as stone. Gerald said nothing, just looked him straight in the eye. In those eyes, there wasn't just apology. There was real sorrow. One soldier looking at another. One father breaking inside from what his children had done. Then Gerald gave a slight nod. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, just a quiet acknowledgement that the world had changed, and not always for the better. The silence that followed Officer Becker's words felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. The 3 boys stared at their father, faces drained of color, unsure of what to expect next. Gerald, his hand still resting calmly on the arms of his wheelchair, looked out the window, his gaze lost somewhere far beyond the street. Officer Becker's voice broke the tension. "Stand up," he said firmly to his sons. "Now." The boys stood slowly, awkwardly. Jason, the oldest, shifted nervously. Kyle looked at the floor. Ethan, the youngest, opened his mouth, perhaps to offer an excuse, but the look on his father's face silenced him. "Apologize," the officer commanded. "All three of you. Right now." Jason stepped forward hesitantly. "We're sorry, sir," he mumbled. "We didn't mean to—" "Stop," Gerald said, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the room. The boy froze. Gerald turned to face them fully for the first time. His eyes were steady, his jaw set. "Don't say sorry like it's something you were told to do," he said. "Not when you don't understand what you're apologizing for." The room held still as he continued. "You see this hat?" He pointed to the cap resting on the table. "That's not a souvenir. It's not decoration. That hat has seen the blood and sweat of young men who never came home. Friends I held while they took their last breath in the mud. Boys who called for their mothers while the world fell apart around them." His voice didn't rise, but it grew heavier, every word pulled from somewhere deep within. "When I came back, there were no parades. No one waited at the airport. We were forgotten. We were called names. We had doors shut in our faces. And now you throw food at someone like me and think it's funny. You think I'm just some old man in a wheelchair." The boys said nothing. Their father looked at them, his jaw clenched. But there was something else in his eyes now. Shame and a kind of pain only a parent could feel. "Gerald," the officer said quietly, stepping closer, "you're right. And I am sorry, not just as their father, but as a man. I served too. Fallujah, 2004. I lost good men there. Marines I trained, some younger than these boys. They didn't make it past their 20s. Gerald looked up at him, surprised. "You served?" The officer nodded. 20 years. I thought I was teaching them what it meant to respect sacrifice. Clearly I failed." There was a long pause before Gerald responded. "It's not too late," he said. "But it starts with more than an apology. It starts with understanding." He turned back to the boys. "You live in a country built by the backs of people you'll never meet. People who died afraid but proud. You don't get to laugh at that. You don't get to throw food at that." Kyle's voice cracked. "We didn't know. We were just messing around." "You didn't know because no one told you," Gerald replied. "Because the world doesn't teach history anymore. It buries it under likes and trends and memes." Officer Becker put a hand on Gerald's shoulder. "Let me make it right. I don't want them to walk away from this thinking a mumbled sorry fixes it. I want them to see what they tried to destroy." Gerald sighed and nodded slowly. "Then take them to the wall. Show them the names. Let them hear the silence. That's louder than any speech." There was a heaviness in the air, but also something shifting. The boys looked smaller now. Not just in age, but in presence, dwarfed by the gravity of the moment. Officer Becker turned to them. "This isn't over. We're going to learn together. We're going to do better." Then he looked at Gerald and said with a voice clear and steady, "We won't just apologize. We'll make it right." And in that quiet diner, where a few crumbs of mashed potatoes still clung to the floor, something like respect began to take root, not through punishment or lecture, but through truth, through the quiet strength of a man who had seen too much to waste words, and another who still believed it wasn't too late for the next generation to listen. Through the next morning, Millfield stirred with a gentle buzz. Word spread about the incident at Mary's Diner. 3 local teenagers had humiliated a disabled veteran, only for their police officer father to step in, apologize, and commit to making things right. Nobody expected what came next. Officer Becker gathered Jason, Kyle, and Ethan that evening after dinner. He looked at each boy in turn, his expression both stern and vulnerable. "Gentlemen," he began, "you're going to spend the summer at the Veterans Retirement Home. Full time. That is your duty now." The boys exchanged uneasy glances. Jason tried to protest. "Dad, that's the lot." Kyle rolled his eyes. Ethan looked ready to bolt. "I know," Becker replied, "but you need to see, to feel, to understand. You owe that to Sergeant Gerald and to every veteran in town." That next Monday, they showed up at the Millfield Veterans Residence in their best polo shirts and sneakers. The first day, they painted walls, dusted shelves, served meals. The older residents, many confined to wheelchairs or walkers, greeted them with polite smiles and curious gazes. The teenagers were stiff, their movements mechanical. Their faces were tight with boredom or embarrassment. They whispered to each other. But then came Mrs. Thompson, a retired WAC from World War II, who sat in her wheelchair beside a picture of her late husband in uniform. She asked Jason about his family, and he stammered. She smiled gently. "My husband was a machine gunner in Italy," she said. "Every night he wrote to me, 'Come home, Mary,' though he knew he might not. I kept those letters after he fell. You want to understand sacrifice, son? Read them sometime." Jason looked down. He realized the bunkered teenager he felt himself to be was standing before a real person, not some abstract idea of duty. Meanwhile, Kyle had to help Mr. Hernandez, a Korean War vet, push to the garden behind the building. They planted marigolds and oregano in neat rows. Mr. Hernandez told Kyle stories about his Liberty trips to Paris, the way garlic bread tasted on European streets, and how a simple plan had reminded him of home. Kyle started to listen, really listen, when Mr. Hernandez paused and said, "Thank you for your help, son. I've forgotten how to kneel and smell the earth again." That simple word, "thank you," resonated. Kyle's shoulders relaxed for the first time since the apology week. And little Ethan? He encountered Sergeant Dillon, a Desert Storm veteran buried in his own memories. Ethan helped him fix a broken radio so the old sergeant could hear baseball scores again. As the game crackled through the speakers, Ethan sat down beside him, quiet, respectful. "Kids today," Dillon said softly, "they think we're just photos on bricks. But when someone stops to turn us on, that matters." Ethan flashed a small smile. By the end of the third week, all three boys had transformed. They worked landscaping, organized bingo nights, even brought in fresh pastries from Mary's Diner. They knew the residents' names. They asked about their photos. They laughed when the veterans teased them. "Get off my lawn, kid." They'd shout in good-natured grumbling. And through it all, Gerald was central. He moved more easily since the accident, but his spirit had grown lighter. He invited the boys to his home every Thursday afternoon. They mowed his lawn, trimmed his rose bushes, planted zinnias at the fence line. He taught them a bit of carpentry, how to sand rough wood. The boys wheeled him around, pushing him down shady sidewalks for evening strolls. On one breezy Thursday, Gerald paused at a bend in the road overlooking the creek. The brothers flanked him and stood silent. "You boys have done more for me than you'll ever know," Gerald said. "But what matters most is what you do with this. Don't keep it to yourselves." Jason nodded. Kyle wiped a sudden tear. Ethan nodded vigorously. Meanwhile, back in Millfield, the story began to spread. People saw the teens with veteran name tags cleaning Veterans Day floats, tending flags, helping at the annual Memorial Day service. Mary's Diner posted a photo of Gerald, the boys carrying his wheelchair, and a simple caption, "Community begins when we listen." By late July, the atmosphere in town had shifted. Folks who never spoke to Gerald, neighbors, former classmates, young families, started dropping in, saying hello during his coffee time. They paused to shake his hand. They asked about Vietnam, about his best friend on the radio patrol. They even stayed and shared breakfast. At the diner's backroom off-season gathering, someone suggested a small celebration, Gerald Appreciation Morning. It would be a modest affair, coffee, pancakes, a few speeches from the boys and town leaders. When the day came, Gerald rolled into applause. The diner's regulars, including Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Hernandez, and Sergeant Dillon, were standing. Mary, bib holding back her tears, came forward. Jason stepped up with a trembling voice. "Mr. Gerald, we want to say thank you for teaching us what it means to respect real sacrifice. We were wrong. We get it now." Kyle added, "We're grateful for the stories you shared, the work you love. You reminded us what honor sounds like." Ethan, the youngest, gave a small salute. "We promise to live better from here on." Then Officer Becker spoke. "On behalf of my sons and the whole town, thank you, Sergeant Gerald. Thank you for showing us the way." Gerald looked out at the crowd. Many had tears, many nodded. He swallowed and replied in a soft voice. "In war, we learn about loss. When we come home, we must learn about love. That's what's happening here today. I am grateful. They all applauded as Gerald slowly wheeled out into morning light, the sun warming the dusty window. Mary passed him a fresh cup of black coffee. The boys followed, not behind him now, as they had a few months ago, but walking hand in hand, somewhere between his past and their future. The diner's bell rang anew with each arrival, but this time it carried warmth. Inside, people didn't sit quietly. They shared smiles, held doors, thanked veterans as a matter of course. And in that small town's morning ritual, a lesson stayed, that respect once forgotten can be taught, reclaimed, and passed on. All it takes is a moment of humility, a few hours of work, and the quiet courage to say, "We were wrong. We can be better." So Millfield learned from 3 teenagers, a veteran in a wheelchair, and a father who wouldn't let them get off easy. And in return, they gave back something priceless: community. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to support us by subscribing to Old Soldier Story, where we share real, heartfelt stories about veterans who once gave everything for their country. Leave a comment below. We would love to hear your thoughts, or even your own story. And if you believe others should hear this too, please share it with your friends and family. Together, we can preserve and honor the legacy of our veterans, one story, one memory, one tribute at a time.